I'm a former head teacher and teacher for 32 years. I know what it's meant for teachers. I know what it means for children on their first week back and for their parents. This is the time they were so excited. They're thinking about the year. They bought their uniforms. They're really excited. They've had disrupted education during the pandemic. We know it's been difficult getting children back. And suddenly the shock of hearing you can't go back, those head teachers spending the weekend trying to desperately find somewhere for children to be educated. When I heard it last week, I was frustrated, I was shocked, and my heart went out to those children. Now, of course, safety is important. Of course, if the safety issues needs to be there, but why now? And I mean, why couldn't something have been done about this earlier?
Do you think the Department for Education has overreacted?
You can never overreact when it's a safety issue. Yeah. And I can tell you, as someone who's I built 15 schools as a head teacher and running a group of schools, the stock of many of our schools, those built in 1950 schools, I've had schools where windows have fallen in, bits of roof have fallen in. We've known this is coming. This has been a problem that's needed dealing with. So I would rather that every child was safe. But, oh my goodness, why was there not a plan in place for each of these schools? Why was this not identified? And why have we not got a building programme that is actually making sure, never mind fancy, we're talking about safe, fit for purpose, build, we're a modern democracy. So my first, the second I heard about this, I was in the minister's office, demanding answers, because I need those children in front of a teacher in the first week of term. It's really important.
And you say in front of a teacher. Looking at the list today, there's 40 schools really badly affected, about half of them virtually closed entirely, and half a mixture of closed and screen education. So how do you feel about children who are now going to be, as it were, flipping open a screen to be educated?
Because have we learned nothing from the pandemic? We absolutely know that children do not learn properly. They need to be in front of a teacher, and also for their social well-being as well, and just for their mental health of being together. So it might be something that we have to do in the most extreme circumstances, but I mean, to start the year like that I can tell you how those children will feel. And do you know, I have analysed the data on school absence, and what I can tell you is if children do not get a good first week, if they miss in their first week, they're likely to have at least 40% absence in the year ahead. We're storing up a problem here. So we absolutely must get them back to learning.
And if we're talking about around 40 secondary schools, we're probably talking about something like 25,000 children affected one way or another. So a lot
at the moment. At the moment, that's
do you think this is the worst, or do you think there's worse to come?
Of course, there's more to come. So, I mean, I think, look...
By more to come, you mean more schools. With problems?
Yeah, because clearly all of the surveys have not been returned, and this will be a process that unfolds. So, I mean, I am pleased that rigorous safety has been enforced and that children are physically safe, but I don't think this is the end of the story.
And if we sort of pull back a little bit to look at the wider picture, these are children whose education has already been badly affected during the pandemic. Are we really letting down an entire generation of children in England because of this?
Yeah, so I mean, it's very interesting. If we look at up before the pandemic, school standards over the last 20 years were really rising, and things were going really well. We had the shock of the pandemic. This generation, we can see now, is not recovering from that or bouncing back as quickly as everybody thought. If you look at school attendance, if you look at burgeoning special educational needs and this is a generation that has been seriously affected. Now, this is another shock on top of that.
A whole generation. This affects our entire future as a country.
Absolutely. And, and that's why it needs absolute focus. We talk on here all the time about the economy, about, world issues.
Productivity.
We must put our children at the centre of recovery from the pandemic. I think efforts have been made, but not enough. And now is a chance. We must do it now. 1.8 million children persistently absent from school. double before the pandemic, and that's 2 years after the pandemic. Now this, we need a concerted effort from everyone. I need government gripping the public sector. I need them taking this seriously. We need to really, really coalesce around this generation.
And one final point, Rachel. LBC has a story about a meeting that took place inside the department yesterday, I think, when it appeared that education officials were seriously discussing the use of temporary classrooms for as long as 5 years ahead when they were talking to utility companies.
Well, that's extremely concerning. I mean, it does take time if you're doing a school rebuild. As I said, I was one of the schools, actually, that Michael Gove's cancelled by BSF. It was an outstanding, I got it to outstanding. He cancelled it, and I went out and said, I'll build it myself if necessary, and got the money. But we do know, I've done a number of rebuilds, 15 rebuilds, refurbs. It does take time and really careful planning, to rebuild a school. And so we are talking years when you're talking school rebuild. That means children taught in alternative accommodation.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. Are we talking about schools and councils having to hire or requisition sort of hotels, spare office buildings?
I hope not. Although I have turned office buildings and public buildings into schools because I opened 4 free schools. That can be done well and quickly. But frankly, there should have been a plan in place for all these schools anyway. That you can use temporary buildings. It can be effective, but specialist facilities are really particularly affected. And on that list there are special schools, and special schools for seriously disabled children are not easy to come by. So there are some real concerns, particularly for me, the most vulnerable. Do you know that half of children in special schools, half of children in alternative provision schools, half of children with a social worker are not back in school?
I didn't know that.
Exactly.
I know now. I ken knew, as they would say in Scotland. Yeah. If anybody listening was under any doubt as to why this is a really major story, not simply a Westminster squabble, they know now.